the UK has more than enough food to feed everyone. It is a given. Often we don't think that way because of the reality we see, but it has enough food. And also it has, and this is why it might come as a surprise for many, among the cheapest food in the developed world. So food in the supermarket, compared to other countries, is relatively cheap. Now that doesn't feel that way for many of us. And it also doesn't feel for many of us that actually there is enough food going around. If we think about levels of food insecurity, that's people not having enough food or having to rely on charity to have enough food. Numbers vary, but roughly around 15% of the population, or around 25% of households with children, are categorized as food insecure. And that's a pretty shocking number for a rich country which has, again, relatively cheap food and enough food to feed everyone. And even if we look at this 15%, within this 15%, there's different types of food insecurity. Those who are only temporarily or ad hoc food insecures, and those who need to, literally speaking, skip meals because they don't have enough to eat. And we can see it in a number of different statistics. For example, we can see it in children stunting in the UK, something which is almost impossible to believe and something we haven't encountered as much in the past. And now, even though it's very small numbers, these numbers exist in this country. So the first thing to think about in terms of what does it mean for food resilience at the individual and household level is to make sure that everyone has access to enough food, not as a matter of charity, but as a matter of right. The second thing to think about is what kind of food. If there's enough food, of course, we simply have to redistribute it differently. But what's interesting is that if we think about food insecurity, clearly not having enough food, it is a lot about income level. But if we think about the type of food people eat, across income levels, people are eating the wrong type of food. People are consuming a diet which is rich in salt, in sugar, in fat, a diet which is rich in ultra-processed food. We're not eating enough food, enough fresh food, not enough fruit and veg, and you can see it in the lack of micronutrients, the lack of dietary fiber, which all have long-term health impacts. Often people use this term dietary ill health. So while this is not simply about income, we all are suffering from this, and there's a huge implication for the NHS, for our own personal health. It is also the case that those who suffer from food insecurity are more likely to also not being able to eat the right type of food. And if you look at the government's recommended guidelines to eat the right type of food, if you think about housing costs, transport costs, for most families in poverty, it's simply unaffordable. There's simply no way they could financially afford to eat the right food. The second thing to think about is we want to be a country that there is enough food for everyone, but also there's enough good food and everyone has access to that food. Again, not as a matter of charity, but as a matter of right and principle. The third thing to think about food resilience is about culture, skills, knowledge. It's nice to say that everyone should cook at home from scratch. As we know, that is not the reality for most people. And there's many reasons for that. So even though I'm not going into much detail, partly it's to do with culture. It's to do with the idea of eating together rather than eating on our own. And as a kind of anecdotal example, even though I'm a former chef and I cook a lot, if you compared my diet when I'm on my own at home, which is mostly sandwiches, and my diet when my wife and kid are around, or friends or guests, it's a completely different diet. One meets the requirements, the other one with a stretch. So changing the culture around healthy eating, eating together, celebrating good food, which is present in many other countries, which we don't have here. So that's one thing. But there's another thing about how difficult it is for most people to cook from scratch at home. We suffer from time poverty, and that's across income levels. If we think about how long it takes for most people to cook from scratch on a regular basis for themselves and for others, and look at the disincentives for doing so, you can easily get something cheaper, quicker, which might even taste better, might not be as good for you. So when you have to kind of compare these different incentives, often we think, myself included sometimes, it's better not to cook from scratch. The second thing is, if we think about cooking from scratch and eating healthily, there's also an issue of skill and knowledge. Now, some types of politicians have in the past used this idea that if people in poverty simply knew how to cook and how to budget, they won't need to use food banks. So one thing, time poverty affects all of us regardless of income level. It's about work, it's about carrying responsibility. But this issue of skill also affects all of us across income levels. And there's a lack of food literacy education in this country, which needs to be rectified both in terms of cooking skill, but also our knowledge about our food system, where our food comes from, how to use it, what's good for us. Back to the issue of income level, we often think, well, if simply give them the food, they could cook it at home. But that assumes that everyone has access to a functioning kitchen, which is not the case. Again, numbers vary and depends on different statistics. At the minimum, we talk about hundreds of thousands of people which don't have access either to a fridge, freezer, cooker, kitchen utensils. People who also live in temporary accommodation might have to use communal kitchen. So this idea that we can simply get food, cook it at home, eat healthily, doesn't really match the lived experience in reality for many people. So if we want to think about food resilience in a holistic way, and I'm sure my two esteemed colleagues will talk about other aspects of the food system, we need to think about a system in which everyone has access to enough food, access to the right type of food as an issue of rights, not issue of charity. And I don't want to say people have to eat the good food. If you want to eat unhealthy food, by all means do so, but they should have the opportunity to eat food which is good for you and not something which is unaffordable or a privilege only for some. And the last thing is that we should not simply invest in supply chains and technology. We also need to invest in the kind of softer things about skills, knowledge, and culture, that good food is something we all celebrate and want to be part of, rather than something which is seen as a class element or something unaffordable for most. Thanks very much for that.
So food resilience, I'm really glad that Ronald started by unpicking a little bit what we mean, because I agree with him. We use it as it's a really odd word, isn't it? And it's not very clear. And obviously he's covered very eloquently that kind of individual, personal resilience, the scandal, frankly, that in the sixth richest country in the world, nearly a fifth of families can't afford to eat properly or make the healthy choices when they eat, which would save our NHS a fortune down the line. And I think, you know, that every time I see another £20 come off somebody's welfare benefits due to another shift in policy, that £20 I see as that person's food bill. And we know that not living in a culture where we no longer have a functioning welfare system which allows people to make dignified choices around the food they eat is saving a huge cost, is creating a huge cost to both NHS and social care down the line. So that stuff's all really important to me. On a kind of slightly more sort of practical level, I've also, I'm a qualified horticulturist. So I've set up a community-supported agriculture scheme, and Colette's going to talk about some of the practicalities. I live on a small holding, on a very tiny small holding, about an acre. And I've also been the Green Party spokesperson. I'm a Green Party councillor, I should say, and I've been the Green Party spokesperson on food and agriculture. So this is very much me looking kind of across from many different roles, really, many different years. So we talked about the household level and the scandal about household food insecurity, but there's also the kind of resilience in terms of shocks, isn't there? So I think one of the really important things that we're not facing as a society at the minute is actually our food supply is really threatened. And it's not me saying this, is at the IPCC. There's been, even including some quite recent coverage about the fact that we know that our food system is really growing, and we're going to see, I'm hoping somebody else might remind us of the stats in one of the sessions. I couldn't dig them out in time. I was rushing about a bit. But we know that we're expecting quite a big increase in population over the next 20 years, and at the same time, a decrease in food supply. And things like, Spain is going to be like the Sahara, really, isn't it? And I did a trip to Murcia this summer in southern Spain, which I hadn't realised is known as the vegetable bowl of Spain, in a kind of you're really not cool way, because actually the pork bowl of Spain would be the cool thing to be in Spain, apparently, the meat areas, but actually it's the kind of fruit and vegetable capital. But actually it looks very dry. They were mid-drought. Very, you could really see the people growing food near us were really struggling around irrigation. A lot of arguments over water going on. And that's the future that we're going to see in the places we rely on for our basic foodstuffs. So one of the reasons why the household food insecurity thing is so important is because those problems affect people on the lowest income the most. The poorer you are, the more of your income generally goes on your food, obviously, because you don't have, that becomes the bill that is of most priority and the bigger proportion. But it's also a problem for all of us, isn't it? And even if you didn't think it was a problem that food prices are going up, and there was a really interesting headline, wasn't there, the other day, climateflation could push up UK food prices by more than a third by 2050, report says. I mean, it's just one of very many headlines that aren't headlines because we're not actually looking at it. We're not making it the headline we should be, that actually our food prices are going to go up. And we've all seen the signs, haven't we? Do you remember Courgette Gate, when nobody could get courgettes in January? Like, that's something we should all be able to do. Courgettes don't grow in this country in January. And there was the egg crisis, wasn't there? I do vividly remember going around Sainsbury's. I lived just outside Newhaven, just in the country bit behind there in the national park. I remember going to the Newhaven Sainsbury's at Easter, and there were Easter eggs on display in the egg aisles. It was in April, and that is, I looked at that and thought, that's where we're at, isn't it? When instead of eggs, we've got the egg, we've got the egg shortages. We've got Easter eggs instead. That's where we're going to end up. So there's 3 points really, aren't there? So we talked about, the household food insecurity, the scandal of that. There's also the threat to our food resilience as a nation, because we're increasingly reliant on food imports, and policy is actually pushing us towards being more and more reliant on food imports. And at the same time, we've also need to understand that there's huge national security implications around that. So actually, one of the biggest causes of migration, which is such a huge and controversial and very difficult topic at the minute. One of the biggest causes of migration is people not being able to feed themselves anymore because their land is no longer inhabitable, or the land that they rely on for the imports of the food is changing due to climate. So the climate implications for food are massive. They're not being properly looked at, and they have really important human implications, including on migration. So anyone who is anti-migration, and that's not me as a Green, is going to say it needs to be taking our food security situation seriously, because that is going to be the biggest driver of people coming over here because they no longer are able to grow food where they are. So anyway, the good news is, so we've three massive problems, okay? 3 crises: the health crisis, the climate crisis, the nature crisis. The brilliant thing about looking at food systems is actually the answers to those crises are within them, aren't they? So actually improved agricultural practices and improved supply chains, all those things, we can address all of those things. If we could fix the food system, we could make really good inroads into the 3 biggest crises that we're all under. So looking in that joined up way is really important. Just going back to my kind of council role, I suppose, I'm in a position of power. I'm able to influence some things at a local level, which are really important to me. Don't have enough time for growing my vegetables, I'm afraid, but I do get to do things like steer planning policy. And when I say planning policy, that's not like, don't all come up to me and say, oh, my neighbour's built an extension, because I always get there. If I mention planning and accounts, everybody thinks, not that stuff, but the policies around planning. One of the things I think, there's 2 things I'm really proud of at the council. One of them is some draft policies we have in our local plan, which I think are a UK first, around protecting our local food infrastructure. So we can all talk about rebuilding our food systems, can't we? But actually, if we don't have the abattoirs, the mills, the markets, the wholesalers, all that stuff we don't see, if none of that exists, and abattoirs in particular are under threat at the minute, small local abattoirs, if they're all just unrealised housing supply, if they're all just there to be built over, to be lost, if there's no attention given to them, then we're not going to be able to rebuild our local food supply, because there aren't actually going to be the pieces in the middle that would let that to happen. So I have a personal passion around local food infrastructure, the bit in the middle between the local food that Colette's going to talk about and the national picture that I'm also have touched on, food coming in from outside, how everything works, how it all gets distributed. So I'm really pleased with the policy we have in. I really hope it goes past the government inspector when it does get through. It's probably not going to get much attention because there's most planning policy documents have other things in them, like where the housing goes, that distract. But actually, that stuff's really important, because if we can get it past the inspector, other areas can, and there is the potential for, you know, for national policy to take a more holistic approach that actually doesn't just see food as over here, but puts it right in the middle where it should be. Because we often, in the organisation I used to work for, we used to call it putting on our food goggles. If you look through the lens of food, problems can really be fixed, and people get it as well. You're not talking in the abstract. The other project that I'm quite proud of as the council is our levelling up funding we brought into New Haven, which is 3 linked projects: a fancy food restaurant, which we as a council will not be running. I should point out, councils aren't good at running restaurants, so that will be let out. But in New Haven, which is as you know, a really deprived area, fancy fish restaurant to bring people in. Linked to a fish processing facility. Again, how unglamorous is that, a fish processing facility? But for me, my passion for local food infrastructure, how important is that? It's the bit in the middle, isn't it? And then the third bit of it is refurbishing the landing quays for our fisher folk in New Haven, because they're falling into the sea and they cost £6 million to fix. And who's going to spend £6 million? You know, they can barely scratch a living. But they're a really important part of the history, culture and economic activity in New Haven, which is a really deprived area. And by linking those 3 together, I think it's a really important way of addressing that. So I don't have all the answers. I've shared a couple of things that we're trying to do as a council, some of my worries and concerns, and I'm looking forward to taking part in the discussion soon. Thank you all. Thanks.
I got into organic growing because the premise of organic growing is that the health of the soil, plant, animal and man, or woman, are one and indivisible. To me, that's a spiritual thing of like physics, biology will tell you, spirituality. Go to any religion, think about Christianity. This bread is my body, the wine is my blood. We are planet Earth. We're all that. We're all in it together. And one of the things about resilience that I'm sure you hinted at, but we need to consider, is insect loss, species loss, pesticides, you know, homicide for mini critters, herbicides, fungicides. In this quest, for me, I was studying other things than farming in Liverpool in the 1980s, when it was all kicking off. Margaret Thatcher, the free market system, the market economy, individualism. You remember the famous quote, "There is no such thing as society, only individuals." And here we are. We've got the end result, that individualism, that lack of community. How are we going to nourish our community? What is community? We're all gagging for community again, because we've lost that in an individual free market, dog eat dog, competition is the key economic model that has created. So where are all the shops? Where are all the small shops? Where are the greengrocers? Where are the farmers? Someone's put this lovely display, but there's not a lot of us. And even I'm coming to the point after 31 years thinking, shit, I got my life choices all wrong. I've been fighting the fight to save my little small piece of planet. And yet people see me as this elitist, and we have tried our best to keep it affordable. But only last month, I couldn't pay everyone on the payroll. I had to ask them to take a bit of their wage and then just to stay within the overdraft. It's that hard. I've had 2 foreign holidays in 31 years, and we work dawn till dusk, 7 days a week. And I've got 2 sons who love and respect what we do. Growing up, obviously, they just wanted to go to McDonald's, and they hated the fact we never had any family time, no holidays. But now they get it. They get that we're ethical. We've been on the side of what they see as good. I'm beginning to doubt it. I was thinking, well, I should have pushed them into science, and they could have made protein out of flies somewhere. That's the future. Is it the future? It's the food system's there to fight for still. But for me, what's always been the case is well, this is the real UK household income percentage spent on food and non-alcoholic drink, 1963 to 2009. So food in real terms has got cheaper, and in this country especially, for sure. And that's why there are fewer farmers now. And you'll see it, with there are no little shops because economies of scale work, and Amazon, online ordering, and the supermarket, they can always win on price. So when people say to me, oh, it's elitist, it's expensive, it's very difficult to compete with like a kilo of carrots for 50p. When the credit crunch happened in 2008, Tesco's in Lewes had an enormous banner right across the front of their supermarket saying, "We'll help you pay less for your fruit and veg," as if fruit and veg was the most expensive item of their budget, and I beg to differ. I think you've got to factor in the environment to resilience. It is spoken of as a safe and sustainable. I think you do have to think organic. So how do we do that? For me, it's got to come from a return to good governance. Good governance as we see ourselves as a whole, again, in a society, in a community. We can do that. We're not consumers, we're citizens. Competition is not the key. Community-supported agriculture. One thing I said in a previous thing that I wrote for Mother Earth was, it is elitist to expect to bend the natural world to our industrial will. It's elitist to exploit the Earth's natural resources for personal profit. It's elitist to exploit cheap or modern-day slave labour for our own consumer choice and convenience. When so much is, we fill trolleys, we tip it into landfill. That food knowledge, that what to do with food, it's very telling that it's this divide and rule. The immigration thing is very like farmers were the enemy for a long time. Farmers were the enemy. They're the landowners. They're the rich ones. They're the ones. But they've all gone. Where's the skills? Even my sons don't want to take on our farm because it's too much like hard work and there's no money in it. So where are the skills for when we need? If there's a war coming, who's going to know how to farm? Where is the land going to be? Because it's going to be built on. There's so much. There's such a big subject. And I feel that I have been living on the front line and the fault line of all the cracks that are in the food system. And I have become cynical and jaded, but luckily 2 weeks ago I had my second holiday of 31 years, and I'm feeling a lot better about it again. It really helped. I think, and just to try and smash the prejudice that people have against organic. Obviously, we can't all be organic, but I just think that it's what you value. Raj Patel wrote some very good books, Stuffed and Starved and The Value of Nothing. And The Value of Nothing is based on the Oscar Wilde quote, nowadays we know the price of everything and the value of nothing. And I think if food was valued more, the English aren't great culinary experts. We do need to up our game. We have upped our game. But the thing about organic is it's based on principles. Health. Organic agriculture should sustain and enhance the health of the soil, plant, animal, human and planet as one and indivisible. Ecology is the second one. Organic agriculture should be based on living ecological systems and cycles, work with them, emulate them and help sustain them. Fairness. Organic agriculture should build on relationships that ensure fairness with regard to the common environment and life opportunities. That's everyone. The economic model of free market is, if you can't keep up, get out, losers. And care. Organic agriculture should be managed in a precautionary and responsible manner to protect the health and well-being of current and future generations of the environment. It's joined up thinking. It's seeing us all as a community. everyone. And I think that the big question for me is, as someone trying to make a living from vegetables that aren't uber cheap, but not too expensive either, why do we never question why there are people still so poor in this country? They struggle to purchase basics. We need an alternative route to affordability. We need equity.
I guess it's in many ways like the Brexit fishing debate. We fish the fish we don't eat, and we eat the fish that we don't fish. The fish that people in this country want to eat is predominantly fish not caught in our waters. We produce enough food in terms of calories, but a lot of the food we consume, particularly fresh produce, think about the veg and fruit we eat, most of it is imported. So there's a mismatch between what we produce and what we eat.
It's not a food crisis, it's a food distribution crisis, isn't it? It's what's produced and why and where. It is really confusing, isn't it? It's a little bit like those two things do sit together. They are both right. And it's a little bit like when we talk about people not being able to afford fruit and veg, but at the same time our food is too cheap. Those are both true at the same time, okay? And the reason they're true is because we've designed our system where all the subsidies go in the wrong places. So there's a lot of subsidy in the system, although I hate that we call it subsidy in agriculture, because we don't call it subsidy anything else, we call it investment, don't we? So all our investment goes into keeping the food cheap in the supermarkets and enhancing the profits of very big global manufacturers and distributors. But actually, if we had a system that actually supported what we want, they would be making Collette's business model make sense instead of making it much more profitable for Sainsbury's or Tesco's. So both those things are true. It's what we produce. It's particularly, obviously, the other thing that people, I don't want to get hung up on a meat conversation because that's not what we're here for, but obviously a lot of what's produced then goes into animal feed, and we do all need to eat. I'm not vegan, and I eat a climate-friendly diet with small amounts of well-produced meat. I really wish I hadn't said the meat word because I know we're just going to get distracted by that. But nonetheless, we do all need to eat less meat if we were going to have a sustainable food system, because so much land is taken up. So you have meat, grazing in land that isn't suitable for other stuff is a really good use of that land, but using really prime land that could be used for horticulture, fruit and veg, or could be used for agriculture doesn't make sense. So it's what we're producing, where and how, and most of all, it's how the money goes, isn't it? It's the fact that we don't invest in or subsidise the bits of the system that we actually need to resolve those big crises. I actually think it's more important that we are supporting kind of producers like Collette, who are doing the right thing by planet, by people, and make them part of a better functioning system and more accessible, and that the subsidies we put into the system go to make what they do have a business model that works. Like, it really breaks my heart. I mean, it's not just Collette, it's like all of the small producers I've talked to over the years. It's so bloody hard, isn't it? And I think, having set up a community supported agriculture scheme myself, and I've done loads of budgets for really difficult projects. Nothing is as hard as trying to make money out of organic fruit and vegetables, out of ingredients. All the money in the system is down the line. If we had a better system, we would have schools with proper places to eat, where people ate together, free for everyone, which is what they have in Europe. It's not like some radical hippie nonsense. I know I'm a radical hippie nonsense person, but actually that's pretty normal in most countries that have any sense. It's actually an investment in children's health, which pays a lot more in, saved health costs down the line. It's a no-brainer when you look at the thing. And those local canteens would be using locally sourced food from places like, Colette's is a small, but from local producers, be incentivised within the procurement system to buy locally, so that we have the market for that local food that does the right thing for the planet as well. But that isn't the way we've designed the system, is it? We've gone the wrong way round on it.
Competition thing. In Portugal, a friend was saying their kid growing up in Portugal, at lunchtime, all the school kids used to make a train, hands over each other's shoulders, and sing the train song and go up to the OAP home. And there they shared a kitchen. The young ones ate with the old ones. It worked, and then they all went back again. we don't do that joined up thinking. We're just, oh, how can I make a profit? It's all about profit rather than what we need.
When you look at, you know, analysis, because I spent far too much time looking at these as a big scales about what is a resilient system. In any system, this could be in like electrical engineering, not just food. It's when you've got loads of different nodes and networks, haven't you? And lots of, you know, you get those complicated webby maps. And what we've done in our food system is we've streamlined those complex nodes of multiple small producers, multiple small distributors, you know, multiple kind of those important infrastructure people in the middle. We've made it all really simple and streamlined and dependent on certain routes. So actually having a diverse picture which includes individual opportunities for growing slightly larger scale. I've been involved in community supported agriculture myself. I think we should recognise it's quite hard work as well as, but it is part of the solution. You know, smaller producers and indeed big producers, it does make sense to do some things at scale, but with a level playing field that ensures everyone has to look after the planet.
If supermarkets weren't just driven by maximising profits, but could, you know, adhere to fairness, care, health, ecology, not just for them, not just for the consumers, but for all of the, you know, the middlemen transporting it. We just do what we need to keep it all going, rather than, you know, Guy Watson set up his box scheme because he got treated so badly by supermarkets, and they put the phone down on him and said, you know, when I say jump, you jump, and put the phone down on him. And then he thought, right, he started his box scheme. But it's just about being kind to the environment, kind to each other, kind to ourselves, bringing back that community and saying, what do we need? How are we going to go forward?
Just to say, I think there are things we can do locally. A system is a mix of things, isn't it? It's the top-down levers, and thank you for suggesting voting choices. I think it is really important who's pulling those, you know, controlling those levers. Other parties are available, of course, but it's really important that pressure is put on politicians not to have this blind spot that we're in at the minute. But actually, at local level, this is an amazing area for local options, and particularly if you have the money and the time to get involved, there's amazing projects everywhere. We have the Food Partnership here as well, who bring together different bits. There's loads of opportunities to get involved and engaged, and to do that little bit, or maybe take that next step on a slightly bigger scale. And around food distribution as well, you know, there's some kind of community bits stepping in where some of our systems are failing us.
They're listening. I think the question is, what will they do with, I think that they're under a lot of pressure from a lot of different angles, yeah? And it's how do you kind of reconcile all these different pressure, but they definitely are listening.
I think there is something as well, you know, I think to give credit to the government, they've enhanced free school meal provision, and which is a no-brainer. I think there are some things they would do.
They're working on procurement as well.
The procurement that we've had from the previous government, the idea of a 50% local and sustainable requirement in public sector procurement, which would be, so basically that means things like schools, hospitals, prisons, which would be a game changer, I think, you know, if those levers are there, and we should be using those levers to support our local production. I think part of what we should all be doing is actually making it a vote winner, as it were, because, you know, politicians, we're fickle, we go where the votes are, you know, we should be making it their priority by putting that pressure on.
I don't want to think that there's any good news when it comes to climate change, but from UK perspective, actually climate change is allowing us to grow more food and more varied foods than we used to in the past. I mean, it hugely impacts everything we import, and there's many other impacts, but it could be slightly positive to what we grow.
If I didn't have such time poverty, I would love to open up the farm to schools where they come and help sow and grow and then cook together. There's lots of things happening. We donate a lot of our surplus to Fair Share or Sussex Surplus, and they're setting up feasts together. I think we just got to hang on to all these positives and joined up thinking, work, you know, whatever you're doing, join up, help push it all forward together.
The climate and nature crises and the health crises, which is where I started off, are so key. I would slightly disagree with you about farmers. I think they're really struggling because of the unpredictability of the seasons, you know, and I think that's making an already really difficult job for those smaller producers who are more likely to be doing the right thing in particular really hard. It does worry me. But I think there is at that kind of agricultural scale, there is more recognition of that there's a lot new different varieties, that kind of thing. I think it's an interesting point though, isn't it, about growing our own? Have we caught up with that? I wonder whether there is a piece around that I haven't particularly explored. And just to reiterate the point about schools as well, I absolutely agree. Again, I'm hoping that's something that the National Food Strategy, certainly the independent National Food Strategy, that was very much a strand, wasn't it? In schools, you need the food, good food to eat alongside education. So at the minute, it is down to some of the amazing projects. I know Gemma, who's sitting here, does some amazing work with schools and food growing. There's many parents who do amazing work with clubs in their schools, but it would be helpful if we could capture that and make it the normal, not the extra bit of effort going into it. So I really agree with you. I think it would be a hugely important. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks so much to all our fantastic speakers.